The 38th floor of the Harrington Tower had a particular kind of silence, not the absence of sound, but the presence of something heavier. The kind of quiet that accumulates in rooms where decisions are made about people who will never set foot in them. Norman Quill noticed it the moment the elevator doors opened. He stood there for a second longer than necessary, the toolbox in his left hand, a work order folded twice in his breast pocket. He was 61 years old, wore the same gray canvas jacket he'd worn for the better part of a decade, and had the unhurried posture of a man who had long since stopped trying to impress anyone. The building's facilities coordinator had called him in at 7:30 on a Thursday morning, with the kind of urgency people reserve for things they don't entirely understand. The chief executive's workstation had crashed. Files were inaccessible. A presentation was due at 9. Norman walked to the reception desk. No one was there yet. He found the office on his own. The name on the frosted glass panel read Sylvie Beaumont Ward, Chief Executive Officer. The door was already open. Not all the way, just enough. Norman knocked twice with his knuckle and waited. "Come in, please." The voice was measured, not cold exactly, but precise. The voice of someone who had learned to make every syllable do its work. Sylvie Beaumont Ward was standing behind her desk rather than sitting at it. She was 53, tall in the way that had less to do with height and more to do with the way she occupied space. Her dark hair was pulled back with the kind of casual efficiency that probably took no effort at all. She was dressed for the 9 o'clock meeting, charcoal blazer, a silk blouse the color of slate, and she was watching the frozen screen of her computer with an expression that was almost philosophical. "It stopped responding at 6:42, she said without looking at him. "I've already tried the usual things. How long has it been running without a restart?" She paused. 11 days, possibly. Norman set his toolbox down on the side table and pulled on a pair of latex gloves. "That'll do it sometimes." She looked at him then, just briefly. He had the build of a man who'd spent his life doing physical work. Broad through the shoulders, hands that looked like they'd fixed more things than most people ever owned. There was a small scar above his left eyebrow she didn't mean to notice. "Raymond mentioned you'd come up yourself," she said. Raymond was the facilities manager and chronically optimistic about timelines. "I assumed he'd send someone younger. He usually does," Norman said, sitting down in front of the workstation. "I was already in the building." That was true. He'd been in the building since 5:15, working on the ventilation controls 2 floors below. He hadn't been asked to come up to 38. He'd offered. He didn't explain any of that. For the next several minutes, the only sound in the office was the quiet percussion of his work, the click of the keyboard, the faint hum of the machine coming back to itself. Sylvie stood near the window with a mug of coffee that had gone lukewarm, pretending to review something on her phone. She wasn't reviewing anything. She was watching him in the reflection of the glass. There was something unusual about the man. She couldn't have named it precisely. He moved without wasted motion. He didn't fill silences with reassurance the way most people did when they were nervous in her presence. He simply worked, and the room seemed to settle around him the way rooms sometimes do when the right person enters them. "There," he said, not triumphantly, just as a statement of fact. The screen resolved itself. The desktop appeared. The files were there. Sylvie crossed back to the desk and looked. Everything was intact. The presentation folder, open, should load fine. She sat down and checked. It did. She let out a breath she hadn't been aware she was holding, and for a fraction of a second her composure relaxed, not into something weak but into something real. A woman who had been quietly frightened for an hour and was now, briefly, relieved. Norman had already begun packing his tools. "Thank you," she said, sincerely. It was the kind of thanks that doesn't require elaboration. He nodded and reached for his toolbox, and that's when it happened. The monitor flickered once, and before the screensaver could activate, the desktop background reloaded. It wasn't the corporate standard, a city skyline, a logo, something institutional. It was a photograph, a personal one. A woman in her 30s, considerably younger, lighter in some way that had nothing to do with weight, standing on a dock somewhere with her arms wide and her eyes closed, laughing at something just out of frame. The lake behind her was the color of hammered bronze in the late afternoon light. Norman saw it for perhaps 3 seconds before the screensaver engaged and the image disappeared. He said nothing. He zipped his toolbox closed and straightened up, but she had seen him see it. The silence that followed had a different quality from the one before. "That photograph," she said, not quite a question. "I didn't look at it." "You did," she said, not accusatory, almost amused in a remote sort of way. "You couldn't help it. It was there." He turned to face her. It was. She was looking at the dark screen now where the image had been. "That was taken at my family's property on Lake Kawagama. I was 36 in that photograph, a beat. I've kept it there for years. I'm not entirely certain why." Norman waited. He had the quality, rare and generally undervalued, of knowing when a person wasn't finished speaking. "I look different now," she said. "People generally do," he said. 17 years is a long time. She turned to look at him properly then. Not the glancing assessment of before, but a real look. "You counted that quickly. You mentioned 53 in the building directory," he said. "I didn't calculate it consciously." Something shifted in her expression. "Not much, a degree or two." "Do you think?" She stopped herself. He waited. "I was going to ask you something," she said, "that I have no business asking someone I've just met. You can ask it anyway." She looked down at the desk for a moment, then back at him. "In that photograph, do you think she looks—" She seemed to weigh the word carefully. "Happy?" Norman considered the question. He did not rush his answer or deflect it with something easy. "She looks like someone who forgot for a few minutes to be in charge of anything," he said. "That's its own kind of happy." Sylvie Beaumont Ward looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded, once, slowly, as though he had confirmed in something she had been quietly wondering about for a very long time. He left at 8:22. She gave the presentation at 9 o'clock, and it went exactly as she had prepared it to go, because things she prepared for always did. Her voice was steady, her slides were precise, her answers to the board's questions were measured and correct. 40 minutes later, she was back in her office, with the door closed. She looked at the screensaver for a moment, then moved the mouse. The photograph appeared again. The dock, the lake, the woman with her arms out. She sat with it for a moment longer than she usually did. Norman Quill's official job title was Senior Facilities Technician, Contract Division. He had held that title for 4 years, which was approximately 4 years longer than anyone familiar with his actual circumstances might have expected. His son, Max, had said as much over the phone the previous Sunday. "Dad, you own 40% of Quill infrastructure. You built 3 of the bridges in this province. You could retire 3 times over. Why are you still fixing ventilation systems in other people's buildings?" "Because I'm good at it," Norman had said. That was the complete answer as far as he was concerned. His wife, Joanna, had died 5 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, 11 months from diagnosis. They had been married for 28 years, and he had known on the second date that she was the person he wanted to be around for the rest of his life. He hadn't wanted to be around very much of anything for a while after she was gone, which was how he'd ended up taking the contract work in the first place. Not out of financial necessity. Out of the particular need some men have to stay useful, to keep their hands on something that functions or doesn't, for legible reasons. He did not talk about Joanna with most people. He did not talk about the company, or the projects, or the fact that the building he was currently servicing had been built on a structural engineering principle his firm had developed and patented in 2009. He found it easier to be unremarkable. He had been remarkable for a long time, and it had asked a great deal of him, and now he was content to be someone that people thanked briefly and forgot. He did not forget Sylvie Beaumont Ward. The second time they encountered each other was 4 days later. Norman was in the building's service corridor on the 37th floor, checking a junction box that had been flagged in the weekly audit, when he heard footsteps slow in the hallway beyond the maintenance door. A pause, then a knock. He opened it. Sylvie Beaumont Ward was in the hallway with a paper coffee cup in each hand. She was in a different blazer today. Navy, with the sleeves pushed up, and she was looking at him with an expression of almost academic composure, as though she had thought carefully about this moment and decided to treat it as routine. "Raymond said you'd be on this floor today," she said. "I wanted to thank you again for last week. The presentation went well. Good." She held out one of the cups. "I didn't know how you'd take it." "Black is fine." He took it. "Thank you." There was a brief considered silence. She was not a woman who found silence uncomfortable, which made her unusual in his experience. "The photograph," she said. "I've been thinking about what you said. I shouldn't have said much. It wasn't my business. I asked you," she said, And what you said was, she paused. Accurate, I think. I was on holiday. My husband had stayed in the city because of a deal that was closing, and I was at the lake with my daughter, who was 12 at the time. I remember thinking I'd never felt so light. She tilted the cup slightly, watching the surface of the liquid. My husband and I divorced 2 years later. My daughter is 29 now and lives in Vancouver. I see her at Christmas and sometimes in the summer if schedules align. She said all of this in the tone of someone reading from a document, and yet the information was entirely personal, and she seemed to know it. I don't know why I'm telling you this, she added. I've been told I'm easy to talk to, Norman said. I'm never entirely sure if that's a compliment. She looked at him and something almost like a smile crossed her face. Brief and carefully contained, like a bird landing on a wire and then lifting away. What about you, she said. Do you have family in the city? A son, he said. 2 grandchildren. My wife passed 5 years ago. I'm sorry. She was a good person, Norman said. Generous in the exact ways that count. He looked at the junction box. That's a difficult thing to replace in a life. Sylvie Beaumont Ward said nothing for a moment. Yes, she said finally. It is. They stood there in the service corridor, the CEO of a company with 1,400 employees and the man in the gray canvas jacket, drinking their coffee with the fluorescent light buzzing faintly overhead, and neither of them said anything more for a while, which somehow seemed to be enough. The building had a small rooftop garden on the 3rd floor, accessible to staff, largely unused before noon. Norman had found it in his 2nd week and made a habit of eating his lunch there when the weather permitted. He was there the following Wednesday when the access door opened, and Sylvie stepped through it, a phone pressed to her ear. She stopped when she saw him. He made a small gesture. Go ahead, don't mind me, and she continued her call, moving to the far railing with her back to him. He ate his sandwich. The call was terse, professional, conclusive. When it ended, she stayed at the railing for a moment longer, looking out at the city. You come here often? She said without turning around. There was a dry note in her voice, intentional. Every day I'm in the building. She turned around and leaned back against the railing. I've been in this building for 7 years and I've never been up here. It gets better toward the end of September, he said, when the light starts coming in at an angle. She looked around at the planters, mostly ornamental grasses, a few struggling herbs someone had installed with good intentions. No one takes care of it, I know. I've been noting it in the maintenance logs. He paused. Raymond hasn't acted on it yet. Send me the log directly, she said. I'll see to it. He looked at her. It was a small thing, a garden on a rooftop, and she had just decided it mattered without being asked to. That told him something. You eat up here alone? She said, generally. She considered this. Do you mind if I? No, he said. She sat down on the bench across from him, not with the stiffness of someone doing something unfamiliar, but with the practiced ease of a woman who had learned, over decades, to adapt her body language to whatever room she was in. She didn't have anything with her to eat. She folded her hands in her lap and looked at the skyline. My daughter called this morning, she said, unprompted. She's been offered a position in London. Will she take it? She says she doesn't know yet. A pause. She'll take it. She has my capacity for forward motion. Staying still was never something either of us has been particularly good at. Norman looked at his sandwich. Staying still is underrated. She tilted her head slightly. You'd say that. I would, he agreed. I spent 20 years moving forward at speed. Buildings, projects, deadlines. I was never in any of them, not really. I was always already in the next one. He set his lunch down. I'm not certain I recommend it, in retrospect. She was quiet. The kind of quiet that meant she was absorbing something rather than formulating a response. What changed? She asked. My wife got sick, he said, and I stopped planning 3 years ahead and started sitting in the room I was actually in. He looked at the rooftop garden. It was a difficult way to learn a simple thing. Sylvie Beaumont Ward looked at her hands. I have a board meeting in 20 minutes, she said, that I've been preparing for since last Tuesday. I have 3 strategic reviews this month. I have a succession framework to finalize before the quarter ends. She paused. I genuinely cannot remember the last time I sat somewhere with nothing in my hands. You're doing it now, he said. She looked up. The city hummed below them. Somewhere over the lake to the south, a bank of cloud was moving in slow and white and unhurried. I suppose I am, she said. The maintenance issue on the 38th floor came up again 10 days later. A different problem this time, something in the climate control system running warm in the afternoons. Norman came up on a Friday. Sylvie was in her office when he arrived, on a call, and she held up one finger. One moment, as he entered, he waited by the window. The call ended. She set the phone down. "Climate control," he said. "The afternoon sun comes through the west windows," she said. "I've been complaining about it since April." He checked the thermostat settings, traced the register, found the problem in 7 minutes. A damper valve that had been installed incorrectly during last year's renovation. He fixed it. While he was packing up, she came to stand near the window, not at it, not quite, and looked out at the city the way people look at things they are no longer entirely seeing. "My daughter called again last night," she said. "She's taking the position. London." "London," she said it evenly. "She's 30 next year. It's the right move. She knows it. I know it." "A beat. I'll miss her." "Yes," he said. "You will." She looked at him. "You don't offer consolation easily." "Consolation isn't always useful," he said. "Missing people you love is evidence that the love was real. It doesn't need to be fixed." She absorbed this in the way he had noticed, of absorbing things she intended to hold on to, a quality of attention that had nothing performative in it. "You have an unusual way of looking at things," she said. "I've been told." She looked at the window. "My lake property, the one in the photograph. I haven't been there in 2 summers. There never seems to be time." She paused. "I'm going the weekend after next, for 3 days." He closed the toolbox. "The dock needs work," she said, almost casually. "The boards were soft in places last time I checked. I hired a firm from Halliburton to look at it, but they can't come until October." He said nothing. "I imagine there are people who would know how to assess whether it's safe to walk on," she said. He stood up. The silence between them had a shape by now. He had begun to recognize its outlines. "I know what soft dock boards look like," he said. "I thought you might." She said it without looking at him. Professional, almost indifferent. The request, if that's what it was, had been made entirely by implication, in the precise register of a woman who had spent 30 years making things happen through rooms without appearing to push them. "I could look at it Saturday morning," he said. "If you wanted a second opinion before October." She looked at him then, not the guarded assessment of their first meeting, not the careful social distance of the weeks that followed. Something else. Something quieter and less defended. "That would be helpful," she said. "Thank you, Norman." It was the first time she had used his name. The drive to Lake Kawagama took 3 hours. Norman left at 6 in the morning in the same truck he'd driven for 11 years. No particular reason to replace it. It ran. He stopped once for coffee at a gas station outside Minden and watched the landscape change from highway corridor to boreal margin, the birches going yellow at their edges, the light coming in low and serious through the tree line. He had told his son Max where he was going. Max had asked 17 questions and been given answers to approximately 3 of them. The property was at the end of a gravel road, a modest sign, a long drive through mature white pines, and then the lake appearing suddenly, the way lakes in that part of Ontario tend to, as though they've been waiting behind a curtain. The cottage itself was not what he expected, not grand, older, possibly 1940s, the kind of place that had been extended twice over the decades without losing its original proportions. A wide porch, board and batten siding that had weathered to gray. 2 Adirondack chairs angled toward the dock. Sylvie was on the porch when he arrived. She was wearing a flannel shirt over a plain white tee, jeans, and the particular kind of calm that Norman had only ever seen on people who were genuinely relieved to be somewhere. She looked in that moment like the woman in the photograph. Not younger. That was the wrong word. Lighter, like something had been set down at the end of the driveway. "You found it," she said. It was well described. He looked at the lake, the dock. She walked him down to it. He spent 45 minutes on his hands and knees checking boards, testing joists, probing the support posts at the water line. 4 boards needed replacing. 2 support brackets were corroded but not critical. The structure itself was sound. He said so. "You're certain?" "I'm certain." She stood at the end of the dock, the one that appeared in the photograph, and looked out at the water. The lake was flat that morning, the color of old pewter in the early light. A loon called from somewhere to the north. She didn't answer his confirmation right away. She just stood there, and he understood she was doing the thing she'd said she wasn't good at. Staying still, sitting inside a moment rather than moving through it to the next one. He walked back down the dock and stood a few feet away from her. "My daughter had her first swimming lesson here," she said. "From the end of this dock, she was 5. A pause. I remember thinking, I need to remember this exactly. The way she looked with her water wings. The way she screamed when the water was cold. She was quiet for a moment. I remember it exactly." Norman said nothing. "Thank you for coming out here," she said. "This wasn't a small thing to ask." "You didn't ask," he said. "Not quite." "No," she allowed. "I suppose I didn't." She looked at him sideways, a look that contained something close to humor. "Old habit." He smiled. It was small, and it was genuine. "I know the habit." She turned to face him more fully then, and the composure she carried so naturally, the executive's posture, the managed distance, had receded enough to show something else. Not vulnerability exactly, more like honesty. The specific honesty of someone who has spent too long in rooms where they couldn't afford it. "In the photograph," she said, "the one on the desktop," she seemed to be choosing her words with the same precision she brought to everything, but with a different purpose. Not efficiency this time, but accuracy. "Do I?" She stopped, tried again. "When you saw it, what did you see?" Norman looked at the lake. "I saw someone who was completely present," he said, "not performing, not calculating, not managing anything. Just there, on a dock, in the light." He paused. "I see that now, too." The water moved. A small wave lifted against the dock pilings and fell back. Sylvie Beaumont Ward looked at him for a long moment, long enough that the loon called again in the distance, and the trees at the far edge of the lake shifted in a wind that hadn't reached them yet. "Would you like to stay for coffee?" she said. "Before you drive back?" "Yes," he said. "I would." They walked back up to the cottage together, the dock solid beneath them, the morning just beginning to open up, neither of them hurrying, and the day had more in it than either of them had known to expect when it started.